What's going on, everybody? Yet again, for the 16th consecutive week, I've got my midweek Q&A. Wednesday has become such a fun day for me. I always look forward to your questions. I always look forward to what you want to hear about, and I am super excited yet again. If you have not done so in the past, down below in the comments, please ask your question that I will get to in an upcoming episode. If I don't get to it this next week, ask it again until I do. I try really hard to find questions of people that I've not yet answered a question to yet. Those usually go toward my top of my list, but some of you ask such great questions. I've used your questions multiple times. So whether you're a first-time question asker or somebody whose questions have been used in the past, please, down below in the comments, leave your question. That being said, I've got 5 really good questions. I really like this group of questions this week. I got 5 questions. Let's look at the first one right now. I recently bought a collection of vintage football cards. Do you think vintage football cards will continue their rise in value due to the scarcity of the nice condition cards? See, I love this question, and the reason I love this question is because I know so much of my channel revolves around vintage baseball cards, and I do love vintage baseball cards. I've been a vintage baseball card collector since I was, 10 years old. I literally was buying vintage baseball cards as a kid. I was buying Ted Williams cards and Eddie Matthews cards, and I've always had a thing for vintage cards, but I really, really like vintage football as well. And one of the biggest areas that I've been buying cards over the last year or two has been with vintage football. And one of the reasons why I've been so focused on vintage football is because I think they are so undervalued. Now, value is all relative, right? Some people say, well, they're not undervalued because value is based on demand, so there's not demand, otherwise they would be worth more. I do agree with that, but I think they're overlooked. I think there's demand for these cards that just is not really been explored by a lot of people. When you look at vintage football cards, we have some of the all-time great players from the 1950s, for example. You've got at the very beginning of the decade, you've got Otto Graham. Then toward the end of the decade, you've got Johnny Unitas and Bart Starr. You've got Jim Brown. And that's just a few of the, offensive players. Then into the 60s, we've got more and more. You have one of the best defensive players of all time, Dick Butkus, in the middle of the 1960s. The middle of the 60s, you've got Gale Sayers. There are so many really great players from that era. So to me, I think that they're undervalued, and I think, this is just me, I think they're a low-hanging fruit. I think they're an area that you're going to see things pick up over the next few years. And I've said this a couple of times before, but I'll reiterate it again here now. Here's my thought process. By far the most popular modern cards are football cards. Football cards are very, very popular with the modern card collectors. And my personal opinion is that a lot of modern collectors are in for a bit of some problems, as I think the modern card market starts to have some issues with overproduction, with people seeing some expensive cards taking huge dips, kind of being caught, with the hot potato in their hand. And I don't think these people are going to leave the industry. I don't think you're going to see a bunch of collectors just suddenly completely stop. I think they're going to transition to the stability of vintage cards. And there is more stability in vintage cards for a lot of reasons. For example, the fact that a player's not going to get hurt because they're retired. There's a less likely chance that you're going to have a guy like Jim Brown or some deceased player have bad social thing come out about a player who's not around anymore or at the end of their life. Versus you have things happening all the time with the current players. So whether people like it or not, vintage cards are clearly more stable just because of the news media and the sorts of news that comes out about current players versus former players. So that being said, I think that the modern collector is going to continue to stay in the hobby, and I think they're going to slowly but surely start to go back a little bit more and a little bit more into the stability of vintage cards. And I don't think they're going to go from a modern football collector to a vintage baseball collector. I mean, they might, and some of them will. But I think the people that are into football cards are going to stay into football cards. They're just going to go into vintage football cards. So I see a lot of growth potential personally in vintage football cards. I've been buying a lot of vintage football cards recently. I've shown off some of those. I've bought up several Otto Graham cards, several Jim Brown cards. I just finished my run of base Gale Sayers cards. Bart Starr. I've bought a lot of these different guys, and I'm going to continue to do so because I like the cards, and that's really the key. Again, you want to be buying things that you like. I like vintage football cards. I'm going to keep buying vintage football cards, but I do think that there's a lot of growth potential in the vintage football card industry.
Do you think the grading companies grade the vintage cards too harshly, or do you think they are right in doing so?
So this is a great question. It's very topical. A lot of talk about, PSA and SGC grade reveals and what's going on with grading, and are they grading harsher than they used to? And so this is a very common topic. I just did a video the other day with Mike, baseball collector of Bench Clear Media, of Chasing Cardboard. And one of the things that we talked about, the main topic that we talked about in one of our two recent discussions was the whole grading industry. Now, whether I think they're grading cards too harshly, I could talk about this for a long time. I won't talk about it for a crazy amount of time, but I will say a couple of things. First of all, the quality control of vintage cards back in the 40s, 50s, 60s is not anything like it is now. The card stock then was awful. The paper that was used is awful. You can see in a lot of times the pulp in the paper. You can see the irregularities just in the paper. So even if the card is printed perfectly and it's perfectly centered and it has pack fresh corners, there's still issues with the card just because of the quality of the paper that is used. The way that they cut the cards, and a lot of times they cut them with wire, they cut them with different methods, and when they did it, a lot of times it left rough cuts. When things were fed in, they were cut at angled diamond cuts. There's a lot of centering issues. The quality control then is so much different than it is now. There'd be a card you'd see that is well centered on the front but not on the back, or on the back but not on the front. So there were issues. Now, do I think they're grading too harshly? Not necessarily. My only request of a grading company is consistency. You can set your standards however you want. It really does not matter to me if you decide that 60-40 is okay for a 9, or if 60-40 makes it an 8, or if 60-40 is good enough to be a 10. That does not really matter to me. The only thing that I want from a grading company is if you graded a card 30 years ago in the middle 1990s, or you're grading a card now, it should be held to the same exact standard. And quite frankly, I feel like the exact same methodology should be used. You shouldn't say, all of a sudden, we're going to use this high-powered magnification that you didn't use back then, because then just by definition, you've made the standards harder. So do I think they're grading them too harshly? No, not necessarily. I mean, I think that a vintage card in a 4 in a lot of cases is a beautiful card. And it's fine that it's a 4. It doesn't need to be a 9 to be a beautiful card. So No, I don't think they're grading vintage cards too harshly, but I do think that the consistency is the issue. And here's the other thing I'll say. It seems to me, now I don't know this as a fact, but what it seems like to me is they have different card graders at PSA for vintage cards versus modern cards. It seems like it's different because you can't submit them together. So if you can't submit a modern card with a vintage card, there has to be a reason for that, right? If there has to be a reason for that, it makes me think that a different person is only grading vintage versus only grading modern. That's a problem, because if you have different people grading vintage than modern, then the standards aren't the same just by the fact that the pool of people, the judges, are different, right? If you have an Olympic event, so let's just take Olympic diving, and the Americans are doing their diving, and you have one set of judges, and then the Russians come up to do their diving, and you have a completely different pool of judges. How's that fair? Right? They're being judged on the same scale. They're being judged really against each other, but you're using a different set of judges. It should be the same eyes on the same card. So I think every grader should be grading vintage and modern, not one group of people for one and one group of people for another, when they're supposedly using the same scale. Now, some people will disagree with that because there are some intricacies to grading vintage cards that there aren't with modern cards. But I'll go back to the fact that if the standard is the same, if the what is a clean edge is the same versus a 7 edge versus an 8 edge versus a 9 corner versus an 8 corner, if the standard is the same, they should all be graded uniformly by the same group of people, not different groups of people grading them under the same grading scale. That's my opinion. So I don't know how well I answered your question, but that's kind of my take on that.
With the technology being used for grading cards improving, do you think higher grades will be harder to come by?
So I think this is a great question. I think it's a great follow-up question too to the question I just answered about, grading in general and grading vintage cards in general. The technology is important, but should we be using the technology? Now, Sports Card Investor with Jeff Wilson is a very polarizing figure in the sports card industry. First of all, he looks at cards as investments. I don't. I look at cards as a hobby. It's something that should be fun. And if they go up in value, great. And along the way, can you be making smart financial purchases over others? Yes. But I don't look at it as like a stock. Stocks are stocks, cards are cards. Anytime you collect anything, anytime you have anything, you want to get a good deal and you want to get a good value. But I'm not doing it for just the value. And that's what an investment is for. But back to Jeff. So Jeff Wilson has a really good production to his channel. Whether you agree with his opinions or not, the production is very, very good. And one of the best things that he produced, it was a while ago, a year or two ago, was he went to SGC's grading facility. And unlike PSA, who has very little transparency, SGC basically opened things up. And one of the things they did in the visit was Jeff had a vintage card that he put in to SGC, and they did like an infrared scan on the card. And when they did the infrared scan, he said, they looked at it and they said, see, there are a couple wrinkles in there that you can't see to the naked eye. So they looked at the card and they said, oh yeah, you can't see those wrinkles, but on the infrared scan, you can see that they are there. The problem I have with that, with this new technology being utilized, is if that same technology was not used in 2000 when SGC was also grading cards, but you're using it now, you're using a harder standard. And as soon as you're using that harder standard, you're not comparing them equally. And if you're not comparing them equally, how is that fair? The whole point of grading is consistency, is equality. And if you're using new technology that you weren't using before, it's not equal. So it's almost like if they are going to make a change, which I don't really have a problem with them using infrared, but there has to be some sort of identification that tells us this card was graded under the new standards, right? It's like the dead ball era versus the live ball era. It's like modern baseball versus, pre-war baseball or whatever it is. If things are different, then we need to know when they became different. So I don't have problems with new technology being used. I think that's probably good, but we can't pretend like the grading scale that we're using now is the same as the grading scale that we were using before we started using this technology. So either use your same exact system that you've used from the beginning to keep things uniform, or let us know that this is a card that was graded under the new technology and the new set of standards. That's where things get dicey, when you start changing the procedures, but you don't identify when the procedures changed.
How would you plan a graded or non-graded card run of a player? If some cards are expensive, would you get a filler card and keep searching? Do you just wait until the right card comes at the right price and just be patient and wait?
This is a fabulous question, and I think it would have a completely different answer for every single person. So to me, the joy of collecting is that we all have our own personal preferences as far as players, as far as quality, as far as grades, as far as grader, as far as leaving it ungraded. So I'll start with where I'll probably end, which is to answer this question. That depends on you. That depends on you. I have been collecting some autogram cards, right? And autogram cards are from about 1950 to the middle, 50s. And to me, a 52 Bowman autogram and a 4 is a really nice card. So I'm totally content having a 4. But if I was to collect that, 85 Topps Mark McGwire Olympic card that I wanted so much as a kid, I would tend to want it in more like an 8 or better. So it kind of depends on what you're collecting, and it depends on what you like. Now, a couple of the sets I've been collecting recently are the 50 Bowman and 51 Bowman sets. And with those, the grade is irrelevant. The quality of the card is irrelevant. I just want to have the card. So I've been going through those two sets, trying to pick up some of the Hall of Famers. So recently picked up in the 50 set, for example, a Casey Stengel, a Ted Williams, a Yogi Berra, and the grade doesn't matter. I just want to have the card. Same with the 51 set. I've picked up the 51 Monty Irvin. I picked up a 51 Richie Ashburn, a 51 Phil Rizzuto, and it doesn't matter to me, the grade. It doesn't matter if it's a 1 or a 2. And in fact, with the 50s, I've been tending to pick up graded ones. And in the 51s, I've been tending to pick up ungraded ones. Now, a couple of the 51s are graded, but it doesn't really matter to me because that's where I'm at. And that's my preference, is just wanting the card and having a little bit of patina on it in the form of rough corners or a rough surface or edges is totally okay. So for you, it just depends. Now, I'll give you another example that's very, very different, which is my Gale Sayers run that I just finished that I mentioned a moment ago. His rookie card is in 1966 Philadelphia. And my rookie card of my Gale Sayers in my Gale Sayers run is a 5.5, and I love the card. But then I've got in that same run, I've got some 6s, got some 7s, I've got an 8. So it just depends. At the end of the day, again, where I finish is kind of where I'm going to start is when you have it, do you like it? If you're okay having a run of a certain player, let's just take Duke Snider, and you look at the Duke Snider rookie card in 1949, and you've got a 2, but you like that 2, then you just need a 2. But if you have a 1 and you're like, I wish I had gotten better than a 1, well, then you shouldn't get the 1. Should you get them graded? That's up to you. Do you like them graded? If you don't like cards graded, don't buy graded ones. But if you prefer that it be authenticated and protected and graded, then you should buy graded ones. Again, that's the beauty of the hobby, and that's the thing I'll continue to say to everyone, is the fun part of this is that you might be doing something completely different than the next person. You might be a collector of just one player from baseball, but you might be a person who likes collecting non-sport cards or oddball cards or pre-war cards or 1950s only cards. It does not matter as long as it's what you like. So, personally, I've done everything from my Gale Sayers runs, that's from 5.5 to 8, to a bunch of these 51 Bowman cards that are mostly ungraded and in a variety of different conditions. The last example I'll give you is my T206s. I've been trying to start picking up some T206 Hall of Famer cards. And so far, all of them have been a grade of 2 or better. Does that mean I'll never have a 1? Probably not. But I anticipate the next one I get will probably be a 2 or better. I kind of like that sweet spot. I want to have the card, but a 2 to me means it's better than a bunch of them out there. And that's kind of cool. But for whatever reason, with the 51 Bowmans, I've got some 50 and 51 Bowmans that they look like they've seen better days. But it doesn't bother me at all for whatever reason. Collect what you like. That's the key.
Do you collect autographs as well? If so, which is your most cherished autograph?
First off, I love autographs. I absolutely love autographs. I've been an autograph collector since I was a kid. In 5th grade, I went to a card show at the Sacramento Community Center and I got a Mickey Mantle autograph and it was $25. The following year, I went to the same card show at the Sacramento Community Center and I got a Ted Williams autograph on a ball for $39. I still have them both. A lot of my autographs are baseball autographs. And I did a video months ago, which I'm going to put a link in the description below. Check it out. That goes through my top 10 favorite autographs, baseball autographs from my collection. And I've got some, I think, pretty darn cool ones in there. Another thing that I did as a kid is I was a through the mail autograph guy when I was like 10 years old. In the back of Beckett magazines, the Beckett price guides, they had the address of every stadium. So what I would do is I would go buy some envelopes and go buy some stamps, and I would take my cards and I'd mail them off to all the players, and a lot of them sent them back. So I got some really great autographs as a kid. I got Nolan Ryan back in the mail. I got Mike Schmidt back in the mail. I got all sorts of players, and I did it for a variety of different sports. I got Chris Mullen back in the mail. In basketball, I got, Neil Anderson in football and Sterling Sharp in football and some really, really cool autographs as a kid. And so I've always really liked autographs. But your question to me, and by the way, I'm a through the mail autograph guy even still, recently. I've gotten, Juan Marichal is still returning through the mail. Goose Gossage is returning through the mail. Mike Mussina is returning. I mean, there are so many Hall of Fame players that even today are returning autographs through the mail. And some of them ask for a small donation, and some of them do it for free. I mean, I got Dan Fouts not that long ago for free, Hall of Fame football player. And so, yes, I'm definitely an autograph guy. And one of the coolest thrills I've had, and one of my favorite videos, which isn't really a super popular one according to the view count, is on New Year's Eve this year, the last day of 2022. I got returned Jack Nicklaus autograph on a photo for free. Jack Nicklaus will respond for free. Check that video out if you haven't. I'll put that in the description below as well. But your question to me is, well, the other part of your question to me is, what is my most meaningful one? Now, in one of the videos that I have that I'm posting in the description below is the time that I went to Yankee spring training in Tampa, Florida with my brother and my dad, and all the events that took place there. And on that trip, I had a team ball I got signed by a bunch of people. And one of the ones I got signed on there was George Steinbrenner. And you can see that autograph in that video. And we sat in the booth at a restaurant next to George Steinbrenner. And I'll tell you what, I know that guy caught some heat. He could not have been kinder to every single person that came up during that dinner. It was incredible how kind he was to everyone. One couple came up actually and said, "Hey, we're big Yankee fans. We came out to spring training, but the tickets for tomorrow's game were sold out, so we're not going to be able to go to a game, but we went to the facility today." And George Steinbrenner asked for the gentleman's name and his wife's name, and he told them he was leaving them tickets at the box office to tell them their name at the box office. And even though the stadium was sold out, he was going to have them sit with him in his suite the following day at the spring training game. And those are the stories you don't hear about George Steinbrenner. And George Steinbrenner, when I turned to him with my team ball with all these autographs on it, could not have been nicer to me. So for whatever that's worth, that is up there. But you're asking for my favorite, or the most meaningful. I'll tell you what I think my most meaningful one is, and it might surprise you. Those of you that have been following my channel for a while know that, I was born and raised a Yankee fan. My dad is a huge Yankee fan to this day. My brother is a huge Yankee fan to this day. And so when I was born in 1979, and they were looking at names when my mom was pregnant, in 1978 and 79, one of the names they were considering was Greg. And my dad, being a big Yankee fan, being a big Greg Nettles fan, they decided they would go with Greg, and they would spell it the way that Greg Nettles spells it, which is Graig, which is unusual from some of the ways that you would normally see the name Greg spelled. And so shortly after I was born, my mom and my dad went to a Yankee game against the Oakland A's, and my mom brought a picture of me, a Polaroid picture, remember those old Polaroid cameras, of me in my Yankee shirt and Yankee hat. She leaned over the edge of the dugout, called for a player to get Greg Nettles' attention, and leaned over, showed him the picture, and asked him to sign the picture during the A's game, in the middle of the A's-Yankee game. Well, that Polaroid picture is right here, and you can see that is me in my Yankee gear, my Yankee hat, my Yankee shirt, and it says, "To Greg, best wishes, Greg Nettles." And it's a little bit faded, but that's pretty darn cool. I was obviously about 3 years old at the time. My mom landed that autograph for me, and I've had it ever since. And that is probably the most special autograph in my collection. But autographs are so cool, There's something about them, and some people aren't big fans. I'm a big autograph collector. That's probably the most special one that's in my collection.
If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I hope you will take a second to do that. Please submit your questions for next week.